The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, and I knew before opening it that the Boulder Ridge Homeowners Association had found another reason to make my life miserable. I stood in my driveway in Breckenridge, Colorado, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid mountain air as I tore open the letter. Xavier Rockwell, that was my name on the fine notice, printed in bold letters like I was some kind of criminal. The charge: excessive snow accumulation on my roof, constituting a violation of Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines. The penalty: $500, due within 14 days. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. My 2-story cabin sat at the edge of our gated community, backing up against national forest land. The roof had maybe 18 inches of powder on it, same as every other house on the street. This was Colorado. This was winter. Snow on roofs was as normal as traffic jams in Denver. But apparently, Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, had decided my particular snow was offensive. I crumpled the letter and walked back inside, where my coffee had gone cold on the kitchen counter. Through the window, I could see the Boulder Ridge Clubhouse about 200 yards down the slope from my property. The building was Patricia's pride and joy, a sprawling structure with floor-to-ceiling windows, a full gym, heated indoor pool, and a banquet hall she rented out for weddings. She treated that clubhouse like it was her personal palace. My phone rang. It was my buddy Marcus from 3 streets over. "Did you get one too?" he asked without preamble. "Snow on roof fine." "Yeah, just opened it." "This is insane. Half the neighborhood got them." Patricia's on some kind of power trip. I poured my cold coffee down the sink and started a fresh pot. "What's her angle?" Jenny said she saw Patricia at the clubhouse yesterday with some insurance adjuster. Apparently, there was minor roof damage from the weight of snow last month, and now she's paranoid about liability. So instead of dealing with the clubhouse maintenance issues, she's fining everyone else. That tracked. Patricia had a talent for deflecting problems onto other people. Last summer, she had fined me $200 because my fence was allegedly half an inch too tall. I had measured it myself with a level and tape measure. It was exactly at the height limit. I fought that fine for 3 months before giving up from exhaustion. "Are you going to pay it?" Marcus asked. I watched the coffee drip into the pot, thinking about my bank account, thinking about the principle of the thing. "I don't know yet." After we hung up, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. I had the whole document saved as a PDF after the fence incident. Section 12.4 was vague as hell, stating only that homeowners must maintain their roofs in good condition and prevent hazards. Nothing about specific snow depth. Nothing about measurement standards. Just bureaucratic language that could mean anything Patricia wanted it to mean. The more I read, the angrier I got. I had bought this place 4 years ago, right after my divorce, thinking a quiet mountain community would be peaceful. Instead, I had ended up in a subdivision run by a wannabe dictator who got her kicks from writing fine notices. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA hotline. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice syrupy sweet. "Boulder Ridge HOA, Patricia Henderson speaking." "Patricia, it's Xavier Rockwell. I just got your fine notice about snow on my roof." "Oh yes, Xavier. I'm so glad you called. We're very concerned about safety this winter. My roof has the same amount of snow as everyone else on the street. Actually, if you check your notice, we've identified your property as having excessive accumulation. The pitch of your roof creates a dangerous situation." I looked out at my roof. It was a standard gable design, nothing unusual. What makes it more dangerous than anyone else's? I'm not a structural engineer, Xavier. I rely on expert opinions. Her tone had shifted from sweet to condescending. The fine is quite reasonable considering the liability issues involved. What expert? Who measured my snow? I did a visual inspection myself during my community rounds. You eyeballed it from the street and decided to fine me $500. If you'd like to dispute this, you're welcome to attend next month's board meeting. The fine is still due by the deadline. She hung up before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the crumpled notice. Next month's board meeting was 3 weeks away. The fine was due in 2 weeks. Even if I showed up to dispute it, Patricia controlled the entire board. She had stacked it with her friends after engineering the removal of the previous president 2 years ago. Everyone knew the board meetings were just rubber stamp sessions for whatever Patricia wanted. Over the next few days, I talked to more neighbors. 12 houses had received the same fine, all on my street, all with perfectly normal amounts of snow. Patricia had apparently driven down Alpine Vista Drive one morning, decided she didn't like what she saw, and mass-produced fine notices. Most people were planning to pay. It was easier than fighting. That was how Patricia maintained power. She made resistance more exhausting than compliance. But something in me refused to bend this time. Maybe it was the arbitrary nature of it. Maybe it was 4 years of accumulated frustration. Maybe I was just tired of being pushed around by someone who got elected to a volunteer position and acted like she ran a fiefdom. I started researching Colorado HOA law. Turned out there were regulations about how associations could levy fines. They needed to provide notice, allow for hearings, follow their own bylaws. The problem was that Boulder Ridge's bylaws were written so loosely that Patricia could interpret them however she wanted. On Thursday evening, I drove down to the clubhouse for the gym. I needed to burn off stress, and I figured I might as well use the amenities my HOA fees paid for. The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, the place was as pretentious as ever. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier in the lobby that probably cost more than my truck, and Patricia's formal portrait hanging near the entrance like she was some kind of founding mother. I was on the treadmill when she walked in with another woman I didn't recognize. They were dressed in expensive workout clothes that had clearly never seen actual sweat. They stood near the weight machines, talking loudly enough for me to hear. The problem is that people just don't respect community standards anymore, Patricia was saying. I spend hours every week driving around documenting violations. It's exhausting. Her friend made sympathetic noises, and the pushback I get. You'd think I was asking people to donate organs instead of just shoveling their roofs. I turned up my headphones and tried to ignore them, but Patricia's voice carried across the entire gym. When I got home that night, I stood in my driveway and really looked at my roof. The snow sat there, pristine and peaceful, exactly as nature intended. Then I looked down the slope toward the clubhouse, its windows glowing in the darkness. The geography of it struck me suddenly. My property sat uphill from the clubhouse, not directly uphill but at an angle. The natural slope of the land ran from my backyard down toward the clubhouse's north side, where the parking lot was located. An idea began forming, terrible and perfect. If Patricia wanted the snow off my roof so badly, I could accommodate her. I just wouldn't control where it ended up. I spent Friday researching snow removal techniques and local weather patterns. A warm front was expected to move through over the weekend, with temperatures climbing into the 40s. Not enough to melt everything, but enough to make the snowpack unstable. Saturday morning, I drove to a hardware store in Frisco, a town 20 minutes away where nobody would recognize me. I bought several bags of rock salt, a long-handled roof rake, and a snow shovel with an extendable handle. The clerk asked if I was preparing for a storm. Just doing some preventive maintenance, I said. Back home, I waited until late afternoon when the sun had warmed everything up. Then I climbed onto my roof with the equipment. I wasn't planning to remove the snow myself. That would take hours and raise questions from neighbors. Instead, I was going to make it unstable enough that nature would do the work for me. I carefully applied rock salt along specific sections of the roof, concentrating on the north-facing slope that angled toward the clubhouse. The salt would melt the bottom layer of snow, creating a slick surface. Combined with the warming temperatures and the natural pitch of my roof, basic physics would handle the rest. The trick was timing. I needed the avalanche to happen when Patricia would notice it, when it would cause maximum drama but not actual danger. The clubhouse was closed on Sunday mornings. Perfect. I spent the rest of Saturday evening watching weather reports and feeling like a cartoon villain. Part of me knew this was childish. Another part of me didn't care anymore. Patricia had pushed and pushed, and now she was going to learn that actions had consequences. Sunday morning arrived with temperatures climbing toward 45 degrees. I made coffee and settled at my kitchen window with a clear view of both my roof and the clubhouse below. The sun was bright, melting the top layer of snow into a slick sheen. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the first crack. It sounded like a tree branch snapping. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The snow began moving slowly at first, just a slight shift. Then gravity took over. 18 inches of heavy, wet snow slid off my roof's north section in a massive white wave. It hit my gutter with a crash, rolled over the edge, and kept going across my backyard. I had done the calculations, but seeing it happen was something else entirely. The avalanche picked up speed as it crossed my lawn, a churning mass of powder and ice chunks. It hit the property line, flowed over the decorative rock border that separated my land from the common area, and continued down the slope. The clubhouse sat there gleaming in the sunlight, completely oblivious to the approaching disaster. The snow wave hit the north parking lot first, spreading across the asphalt like a frozen tsunami. Then it slammed into the building side with a sound like a car crash. Snow piled up against the floor-to-ceiling windows, some of it reaching 10 feet high. One of the decorative light posts bent under the impact. The pile blocked the side entrance completely. I watched it all through my phone camera, jaw hanging open. I had expected some snow to slide down there. I hadn't expected it to look like a natural disaster. For several minutes, nothing happened. The clubhouse sat there half buried in snow. Then I saw a car pull into the main parking lot. Patricia's silver Mercedes. Of course she would show up on a Sunday morning, probably to do paperwork or rearrange the furniture in her domain. I watched her get out of her car, walk toward the building, and stop dead when she saw the north side. Even from my house, I could see her posture change. She stood there for a long moment, then rushed around to examine the damage. My phone rang 15 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Patricia's voice was shrill with fury when I played it back. "Xavier Rockwell, I know what you did. You deliberately caused that snow to damage HOA property. This is vandalism, and you will pay for every cent of cleanup and repairs. Call me back immediately." I deleted the message and made more coffee. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline mixing with a sense of deep satisfaction. The doorbell rang around noon. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia standing on my porch, her face red despite the cold. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Can I help you?" I asked, opening the door but not inviting her in. "You know exactly why I'm here. That stunt with the snow, you could have caused serious damage." "What stunt?" "My snow slid off my roof." "That's what happens in winter. Don't play stupid. You deliberately caused it to hit the clubhouse. I leaned against the doorframe. Actually, Patricia, you told me I had to deal with the snow on my roof. Section 12.4, remember? So I took care of it. Not my fault gravity exists. Her eyes narrowed. You think you're clever. I think I'm in compliance with HOA regulations. Wasn't that the point of your fine? I'll be adding the cleanup costs to your account. We're talking thousands of dollars. For snow that naturally slid off my roof during a warm day. Good luck explaining that to a lawyer. She opened her mouth, closed it, then spun on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes. I watched her drive away, feeling a mix of triumph and dread. I had made a powerful enemy even angrier, and I had no idea what she would do next. The answer came Monday evening. Another envelope, this time hand-delivered by a process server. Patricia was suing me in county court for property damage, demanding $8,500 for cleanup, repairs, and emotional distress. I sat on my couch reading the lawsuit, and the reality of what I had done started sinking in. This wasn't just HOA politics anymore. This was real legal trouble. I had been so focused on revenge that I hadn't fully considered the consequences. Tuesday morning, I took a personal day from my job at the software company in Denver and drove to a lawyer's office in Breckenridge. His name was Thomas Chen, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His receptionist had squeezed me in for an emergency consultation. Thomas was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. I laid out the whole story, including the fine, my salt-induced avalanche, and Patricia's lawsuit. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. Okay, let's talk about what you did and didn't do legally. First, did you violate any laws by salting your roof? I don't think so. It's my property. Correct. Homeowners are allowed to maintain their roofs. The question is whether you did it with malicious intent to damage HOA property. That's going to be hard for them to prove unless you told someone what you were planning. I didn't tell anyone. Good. Second issue, the HOA fine. It's on shaky ground. Their bylaws don't specify snow depth limits, and they can't arbitrarily fine you for a natural weather condition. We could fight that, but she's suing me for damages. Yes, and that's separate from the HOA fine. In the lawsuit, she'll have to prove you deliberately caused the avalanche and that it caused actual damages. Do you know if there was real damage beyond snow piling up? I thought about what I had seen. A light post bent. Snow blocked their side entrance, but the building itself looked fine. Thomas made more notes. Here's my advice. We fight both. We dispute the HOA fine through their internal process and we defend against the lawsuit. The two are connected, which actually helps you. Her fine notice gives you a defense that you were trying to comply with HOA rules. How much is this going to cost me? He named a retainer fee that made my stomach drop, but it was less than the lawsuit amount. I agreed, signed paperwork, and left his office feeling slightly less panicked. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Patricia spread word through the neighborhood that I had vandalized HOA property. Some people believed her. Others, especially those who had received their own bogus fines, quietly reached out to offer support. Marcus showed up at my house on a Wednesday night with beer and solidarity. Patricia's calling an emergency board meeting about you. She wants to add more fines, maybe even start eviction proceedings. She can't evict me. I own my house. She can make your life hell with fines and liens. That's her specialty. We sat in my living room drinking beer and strategizing. Marcus had lived in Boulder Ridge for 8 years and had watched Patricia consolidate power. He knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. There's something else you should know, Marcus said. Patricia's been embezzling from the HOA budget. I nearly choked on my beer. What? Jenny found out by accident. She's friends with Linda, who does bookkeeping for the HOA. There are irregularities in the clubhouse renovation expenses from last year. Invoices that don't match up with actual work done. Money disappearing into vague categories. That's a serious accusation. I know. Linda's scared to come forward because Patricia will destroy her reputation. But if you're already in a legal fight, maybe it's leverage. I thought about it. Exposing embezzlement would take the focus off me, but it would also make this situation nuclear. Patricia would fight back with everything she had. Let me talk to my lawyer, I said. Thomas Chen was very interested in the embezzlement angle. He requested that I get more information without directly involving myself. Marcus arranged for me to meet Linda discreetly at a coffee shop in Dillon, another nearby town. Linda was nervous, a woman in her 60s who had volunteered to help with HOA finances because she liked organizing spreadsheets. She hadn't expected to discover fraud. I started noticing it 6 months ago, she told me, keeping her voice low even though the coffee shop was nearly empty. Invoices from contractors I couldn't verify. A landscaping company that did $15,000 worth of work, but I drove past the clubhouse every day that summer and never saw any landscaping crews. A pool maintenance contract for equipment we already owned. How much total? At least $50,000 over the past 2 years. Maybe more. I only have access to certain records. Why hasn't anyone else noticed? Patricia controls who sees the full financial reports. The board gets summaries she prepares. Homeowners get even less. I only found out because I was reconciling bank statements and noticed discrepancies. Linda gave me copies of documents she had quietly made, along with a list of suspicious transactions. She was terrified of retaliation, but also morally conflicted about staying silent. Thomas reviewed everything and brought in a forensic accountant to verify Linda's findings. The accountant confirmed that the pattern was consistent with embezzlement, though a full audit would be needed for proof. This changes everything, Thomas said during our meeting. Patricia's lawsuit against you becomes a lot less threatening when she's potentially facing criminal charges. So what do? We can use this as leverage to make her drop the lawsuit and the fine, or we can go nuclear and report her to the authorities. Your choice. I went home and thought about it for 2 days. The easy path was blackmail, essentially threatening to expose Patricia unless she backed off. The hard path was doing the right thing and reporting the embezzlement regardless of my personal situation. My ex-wife used to say I had an inconvenient sense of ethics. She meant it as a criticism, but sitting in my cabin looking at Linda's documents, I decided it was actually a compliment. I called Thomas. Report her. Do it officially. He filed a complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office and the Summit County District Attorney. He also sent a letter to Patricia's lawyer informing them that we had discovered evidence of embezzlement and were cooperating with authorities. The letter didn't explicitly threaten her, but the implication was clear. Patricia's response was to double down. She added another $3,000 in fines to my account for various alleged violations. My fence was too tall again. My exterior paint color was wrong, even though it hadn't changed since I bought the house. My mailbox was improperly positioned. She also accelerated her lawsuit, demanding an expedited court date. Her lawyer filed motions attacking my character, claiming I was a disgruntled homeowner with a vendetta. They weren't wrong about the vendetta part, but the truth was more complicated than they wanted to admit. The emergency HOA board meeting happened on a Thursday evening in March. I showed up with Thomas, Marcus, and 15 other homeowners who were fed up with Patricia's reign. The meeting was held in the Clubhouse banquet hall, which had been cleared of snow weeks ago. The bent light post outside was still bent, a reminder of my avalanche. Patricia sat at the head table with her bored cronies, looking imperious. She clearly hadn't expected such a large turnout. Normally, board meetings drew maybe 5 attendees. This emergency meeting has been called to address the vandalism incident perpetrated by Xavier Rockwell. Patricia began, reading from prepared remarks. On February 19th, Mr. Rockwell deliberately caused a snow avalanche that damaged HOA property, resulting in thousands of dollars in cleanup and repair costs. The board is voting tonight on additional disciplinary measures. Thomas stood up. Point of order. Mr. Rockwell has not been found guilty of any wrongdoing in a court of law. This board cannot impose punishments based on unproven allegations. This is an HOA matter, not a legal matter, Patricia said coldly. Actually, since you filed a lawsuit, it's very much a legal matter. Any actions this board takes could be considered prejudicial to the pending case. They argued back and forth about procedural issues while I sat there watching Patricia's face grow redder. Finally, one of the other homeowners, an older man named George, stood up. I'd like to make a motion to remove Patricia Henderson as HOA president based on financial mismanagement and possible embezzlement. The room went dead silent. Patricia's face turned from red to white. That's out of order, she snapped. It's not on the agenda. According to our bylaws, any board member or homeowner can make a motion to remove an officer with cause, George said. He had clearly done his homework. I'm citing financial irregularities that have been reported to the district attorney's office. Chaos erupted. People started shouting questions. Patricia's board allies tried to shut down discussion. Thomas calmly cited bylaw sections that supported George's motion. It was beautiful, terrible chaos. Finally, Patricia stood up and screamed for order. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone get out. You can't adjourn in the middle of a valid motion, Thomas said. Watch me. Patricia grabbed her papers and stormed out of the banquet hall, her board members scurrying after her. The rest of us stayed, and George's motion eventually got a vote from the homeowners present. It wasn't official without a proper board process, but it was a clear message that Patricia had lost the support of the community. Over the next month, things moved fast. The district attorney's office launched an investigation into the HOA finances. They subpoenaed bank records and interviewed Linda. The preliminary findings confirmed embezzlement, and the DA decided to press charges. Patricia was arrested at the clubhouse on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Marcus called me with the news. She was charged with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. The amounts were significant enough to constitute felony charges. Her lawsuit against me collapsed immediately. Her lawyer withdrew from the case, and Patricia was too busy dealing with criminal charges to pursue a civil case. Thomas filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, and the judge granted it. The HOA fine also evaporated. The new interim board, elected in an emergency vote, reviewed Patricia's fine notices and determined that most of them had been arbitrary and improperly issued. They refunded everyone who had paid, and they formally apologized for the harassment. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I felt exhausted. The whole situation had consumed 3 months of my life. I had spent thousands on legal fees. My relationships with some neighbors were permanently damaged. Patricia's supporters believed I had orchestrated her downfall out of spite. They weren't entirely wrong. I hadn't discovered the embezzlement. I hadn't forced her to commit crimes. But I had definitely poked the bear, and the bear had turned out to be more corrupt than I had imagined. Patricia's criminal trial happened in August. I was called as a witness to explain the circumstances that had led to the investigation. I testified about the fine, the lawsuit, and how Linda's information had come to light. I kept it factual and unemotional. Patricia's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive neighbor who had manufactured evidence, but the forensic accountant's testimony was damning. The numbers didn't lie. Patricia had stolen over $62,000 from the HOA over 3 years, using her position of trust to hide fake invoices and phantom expenses. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and found her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered restitution. She broke down crying in the courtroom, saying she had made mistakes but didn't deserve prison. The judge was unmoved. I sat in the gallery watching her being led away in handcuffs, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that it was over. Guilt for the role I had played in starting this chain of events. Satisfaction that justice had been served. Sadness that it had come to this at all. After the trial, life in Boulder Ridge slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected a new board with term limits and financial oversight. They implemented transparent budgeting and regular audits. The clubhouse got repairs, including a new light post to replace the one my avalanche had bent. I became something of an accidental folk hero to some neighbors and a cautionary tale to others. People had strong opinions about whether I had done the right thing. Some thought I was brave for exposing corruption. Others thought I had overreacted to a simple fine and destroyed a woman's life. Marcus and I remained friends. Linda moved to Arizona to live with her daughter, happy to be away from the drama. George became the new HOA president and ran it with calm competence. As for me, I learned some lessons about picking battles and unintended consequences. I had been angry about a $500 fine and had set in motion events that led to someone going to prison. Yes, Patricia had been corrupt. Yes, she had abused her power. But I couldn't escape the fact that my petty revenge had been the catalyst. On a sunny afternoon in October, I stood in my driveway looking at my roof. The first snow of the season was forecast for the weekend. I had already arranged for professional snow removal throughout the winter. No more avalanches, intentional or otherwise. The mountains around Breckenridge were turning white at the peaks, that first dusting of powder that promised a long winter ahead. I thought about everything that had happened since that February morning when Patricia's fine notice arrived. The anger, the revenge, the investigation, the trial. It all seemed surreal now, like it had happened to someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus inviting me to a barbecue at his house. The message included a joke about making sure my grill was the HOA-approved color. I laughed and texted back that I would be there. Life moved forward. The community healed slowly from the Patricia era. People were more engaged with HOA governance now, paying attention to budgets and bylaws instead of trusting blindly. It was a small silver lining to a messy situation. I never did figure out if I was the hero or the villain of this story. Maybe I was both. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes. You stand up for yourself, and the consequences spiral in directions you never anticipated. You fight back against injustice, and you discover darker injustices you hadn't known existed. The bent light post outside the clubhouse got replaced in September, but for months it had stood as a twisted monument to my moment of rebellion. Every time I drove past it, I remembered that Sunday morning when tons of snow slid off my roof and crashed into Patricia's pride and joy. I remembered the satisfaction I felt and the complicated aftermath that followed. On Halloween night, I handed out candy to trick-or-treaters and chatted with parents from the neighborhood. Some of them had stopped speaking to me months ago. Tonight, They were cordial if not warm. Time had softened the edges of the conflict. A woman dressed as a witch, accompanying her kids dressed as superheroes, paused on my porch. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly, "for what you did. Patricia fined us constantly. We were planning to sell and move just to escape her." "I didn't do it to be a hero," I said honestly. "I know, but it mattered anyway." She herded her kids to the next house, and I stood there with my bowl of candy, thinking about accountability and consequences. Patricia had abused her power for years, and everyone had known it on some level. But it took a stupid dispute over roof snow to finally bring it to light. In December, I attended the HOA holiday party at the Clubhouse. The new board had worked hard to rebuild community spirit. The event was well attended, with better food than Patricia's catered affairs had ever featured. People mingled, laughed, and actually seemed to enjoy themselves. George found me by the punch bowl. "I wanted to let you know we finalized the audit. Turns out Patricia took even more than we thought, close to $80,000 total. The insurance company is reimbursing the HOA, so our reserves are healthy again." "That's good news." "It is. And Xavier, for what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't just pay that fine and move on. Sometimes standing up to bullies is the only way to stop them." I nodded, accepting his words but still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Patricia was in prison. Her family had been destroyed. Her reputation was ruined forever. And it had started because I got mad about a fine I could have paid. That night, I drove home through fresh snow, my headlights cutting through the flurries. My cabin looked warm and inviting, lights glowing in the windows. Inside, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the fireplace, watching the flames dance. The story should have ended there with reflection and quiet acceptance. But life rarely wraps up that neatly. In January, almost a full year after the original fine notice, I received a letter from Patricia's daughter. Her name was Amanda, and she was 32, living in Portland. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. She wrote about her mother, about the woman Patricia had been before the HOA presidency consumed her. About how power and control had become an addiction, how Patricia had lost herself in the role. Amanda didn't excuse her mother's crimes, but she asked me to understand the human being behind the villain I had known. The letter hit me hard. I had thought of Patricia as a caricature, a Karen stereotype, a power-hungry tyrant. I hadn't considered her as a complete person with a history and humanity. Amanda's words forced me to confront that limited view. I wrote back. It took me 3 drafts to get the tone right. I expressed regret for how everything had unfolded while standing by the necessity of exposing the embezzlement. I acknowledged Patricia's humanity while not excusing her actions. It was a difficult letter to write. Amanda and I exchanged a few more letters over the following months. It didn't change what had happened, but it added nuance to my understanding. Patricia had been dealing with empty nest syndrome, a distant husband, and a need for validation that the HOA presidency had temporarily filled. She had made terrible choices, criminal choices, but they came from a place of human weakness rather than pure malice. This didn't make me forgive her, exactly. But it complicated my feelings in ways that felt more honest than the simple anger I had carried before. Spring arrived in the mountains, melting the snow and revealing the brown grass underneath. I spent weekends hiking in the national forest behind my property, clearing my head and processing everything. The trails were empty this time of year, perfect for solitary contemplation. On one of these hikes, I ran into a real estate agent staging a house for sale. We chatted briefly, and she mentioned that property values in Boulder Ridge had actually increased since the scandal. People saw the reformed HOA as a positive, evidence of a community that held itself accountable. It was an ironic twist. Patricia's corruption and exposure had made the neighborhood more desirable. Her legacy was the opposite of what she would have wanted. By summer, life had truly returned to normal. The Boulder Ridge HOA was now a model of good governance, hosting workshops for other associations on transparency and oversight. George was invited to speak at a conference in Colorado Springs about HOA reform. I declined interviews from local news outlets wanting to cover the story. I had never sought attention, and I didn't want to be the face of HOA rebellion. I just wanted to live in my house, do my job, and enjoy the mountains. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Someone wrote an article for a Denver magazine about Patricia's downfall, painting me as a crusader. The article was mostly accurate but missed the ambiguity and moral complexity of what had actually happened. It made everything seem cleaner and more heroic than it had been. Marcus found the whole thing hilarious. "You're famous now. The guy who took down a corrupt HOA with snow." That's not what happened. Close enough for the internet. He was right. The story got picked up by various websites and social media. People commented with their own HOA horror stories. I became a symbol for everyone who had ever been unfairly fined or harassed by their homeowners association. It was flattering and uncomfortable in equal measure. Through it all, I kept thinking about that February morning, standing in my driveway with Patricia's fine notice in my hand. If I had just paid it, none of this would have happened. Patricia might still be embezzling. Linda would still be covering it up out of fear. The neighborhood would still be under Patricia's thumb. But also, Patricia wouldn't be in prison. Her family wouldn't be shattered. The community wouldn't have been torn apart and slowly stitched back together. There was no clear moral to this story. No simple lesson about good and evil. Just the messy reality of human conflicts and the unpredictable consequences of standing your ground. In August, I got another letter from Amanda. Patricia had been transferred to a minimum security facility and was working in the prison library. She was attending therapy and taking accounting classes, ironically. Amanda visited her monthly and reported that Patricia was slowly coming to terms with what she had done. The letter included a message Patricia had asked Amanda to pass along. It wasn't an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement. "Tell Xavier I understand why he did what he did. I pushed too hard. I lost perspective. I made my choices, and now I'm living with them." It was the closest thing to closure I was going to get. That night, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and purple. My roof was clear of snow, obviously, in the summer heat. But I thought about the avalanche, the moment when physics and gravity took over and sent all that snow cascading down the slope toward the clubhouse. I had wanted to cause trouble. I had wanted revenge. I had gotten both, plus consequences I never imagined. The bent light post, the investigation, the trial, the imprisonment, all of it flowing from that one moment of calculated rebellion. Would I do it again? I honestly didn't know. The embezzlement needed to be exposed. Patricia needed to be stopped, but I wasn't comfortable with my role as the catalyst. I had been motivated by anger and pettiness, not justice. The fact that justice resulted felt almost accidental. Marcus would tell me I was overthinking it. George would say I did the community a service. Amanda would have a more complicated view that acknowledged both the good and bad outcomes. They were all right in different ways. As fall approached again, bringing the threat of new snow, I made sure my roof was in perfect condition. I had learned my lesson about using nature as a weapon. But I had also learned about standing up for myself, about the importance of transparency and accountability, and about the weight of consequences. The Boulder Ridge HOA sent out a newsletter in September highlighting the changes implemented over the past year. Transparent budgeting, regular financial audits, term limits for board members, easier processes for disputing fines. It was everything Patricia's regime hadn't been. I read the newsletter and felt a complicated sense of pride. The community was better now, even if the path to improvement had been painful. In October, on the anniversary of Patricia's sentencing, I found myself driving past the clubhouse. The light post that my avalanche had bent, the one that had stood for months as evidence of my rebellion, was long gone. In its place was a new light, shining bright and straight. The building looked pristine, its windows reflecting the autumn sky. There was no physical evidence left of what had happened. The snow had melted. The damage had been repaired. Patricia was gone. But the changes to how the HOA operated remained, invisible but significant. I parked and walked into the clubhouse, something I rarely did anymore. The portrait of Patricia that had hung in the lobby was gone, replaced by a landscape painting of the mountains. Her name had been removed from the dedication plaque for the building renovations. It was like she had been erased from the community's history. George was in the office, reviewing paperwork. He looked up when I knocked. "Xavier, come in. What brings you by?" "Just wanted to see how things were going." We talked for a while about mundane HOA business. The budget was healthy. Maintenance was on schedule. No major disputes or drama. It was boring in the best possible way. As I was leaving, George said, "You know, we never really thanked you properly. What you did, exposing the financial problems, it saved this community." I was just angry about a fine. Maybe. But you didn't have to follow through when Linda came forward. You could have used that information just to get Patricia off your back. Instead, you reported it to authorities. That took integrity. I didn't feel particularly full of integrity, but I accepted his words with a nod. Driving home, I thought about the version of this story that would get told in the future. The neighborhood legend of the guy who got fined for snow on his roof and brought down a corrupt HOA president. The details would get simplified, the moral ambiguity smoothed away until it became just another David and Goliath tale. But I would always remember the complexity. The anger and satisfaction of watching that avalanche crash into the clubhouse. The shock of discovering real criminal activity. The guilt of setting events in motion that destroyed someone's life, even if they deserved legal consequences. The slow healing of a community that had been damaged by one person's abuse of power. Winter came again to Breckenridge, and with it the snow I had once weaponized. I kept my roof clear with professional help, no more DIY solutions. I paid my HOA dues on time. I attended a few board meetings to stay informed. I had become a model homeowner, ironic given how the previous year had gone. On a quiet evening in December, almost 2 years after the original fine notice, I was making dinner when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a FedEx delivery, a thick envelope from a legal firm in Denver. Inside was a settlement agreement. Patricia's criminal restitution included payments to the HOA, but her lawyer had also negotiated settlements with individuals who had been unfairly fined. I was receiving a check for $3,000, covering the original $500 fine plus the additional bogus fines she had levied during our dispute, with interest. There was a brief note from Patricia's lawyer explaining the settlement. Patricia had insisted on including individual restitution as part of her plea agreement. She was taking responsibility in the only way she could from prison. I stared at the check for a long time. The money felt strange, like accepting it would mean something I wasn't sure I wanted to mean. But refusing it wouldn't help anyone. I deposited it, and donated half to a local charity that helped families affected by the prison system. It felt like the final chapter of a story that had consumed 2 years of my life. The fine that started everything had been refunded with interest. Patricia was serving her sentence. The HOA was reformed and functional. Life had moved on. But that night, lying in bed listening to wind howl through the mountains, I thought about all the small choices that had led to such large consequences. My decision to salt my roof. Linda's decision to keep copies of documents. Marcus's decision to tell me about the embezzlement. George's decision to make that motion at the board meeting. Patricia's decision to steal money in the first place. Each choice had seemed small at the time, but together they had created a cascade effect not unlike the avalanche that started everything. One thing leading to another, picking up speed and force until the final impact was inevitable and devastating. I finally understood that I wasn't the hero or the villain of this story. I was just one person making choices in a complicated situation. Some of those choices were good. Some were petty. Some had consequences I never could have predicted. That was just how life worked. The snow fell outside, peaceful and quiet, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside my cabin, I was warm and safe, the past settled if not forgotten. Boulder Ridge was a better community now, painful as the journey had been. And I had learned things about myself, about standing up for what's right even when your motivations aren't pure, about the weight of consequences, and the importance of seeing the full humanity in people you disagree with. Patricia would be released from prison in a few years, her life forever changed by her crimes and punishment. I would still be here in my cabin, watching the seasons change, paying my HOA dues to a board that actually served the community. We would probably never speak again, but we were connected by the events we had set in motion. Two people who had clashed and created ripples that spread far beyond either of us. The story of the HOA fine and the avalanche would become legend in Boulder Ridge, told and retold until it bore little resemblance to what actually happened. But I would remember the truth, complex and messy and human, and maybe that was enough. Years from now, when new residents moved into the neighborhood, someone would eventually tell them about the corrupt HOA president who was brought down by a snow avalanche. They would laugh at the audacity of it. They would marvel at the poetic justice. They would probably never think too hard about what it cost or what it meant beyond the surface satisfaction of seeing a bully get their comeuppance. And that was okay. Stories need to be simplified to be told. Legends need heroes and villains. The messy middle ground where most of life actually happens doesn't make for compelling narratives. But sitting in my cabin that December evening, watching snow fall past my windows, I held the complexity of it all. The anger, the revenge, the justice, the consequences, the regret, the satisfaction, the healing. All of it together, none of it canceling out the rest. The next morning, I woke to find 18 inches of fresh powder on my roof. I called my snow removal service and scheduled an appointment. They came that afternoon and safely cleared everything, letting the snow fall harmlessly into my backyard where it wouldn't slide toward anything important. It was anticlimactic and responsible, and exactly what I should have done 2 years ago. But then again, if I had done the sensible thing back then, Patricia might still be embezzling. The HOA might still be dysfunctional. Sometimes the right outcome comes from wrong methods, and you just have to live with that paradox. I spent the rest of the winter being boring. I went to work, came home, went skiing on weekends. I attended exactly 2 HOA meetings, enough to stay informed but not enough to get involved in drama. I was polite to neighbors, maintained my property properly, and kept my head down. It felt good to be boring. After 2 years of conflict and stress and legal proceedings, boring was exactly what I needed. Let someone else be the neighborhood crusader. Let someone else fight the good fight. I had done my part, intentionally or not, and now I just wanted to live my life. Spring thaw came, and with it the usual runoff and mud. The clubhouse looked pristine in the sunshine, no evidence of the avalanche that had hit it more than 2 years ago. Patricia's Mercedes never pulled into that parking lot anymore. A new generation of board members ran the HOA with competence and integrity. Everything had changed. Everything was the same. Life in a mountain community continued with its rhythms of seasons and snow, and the endless drama of people trying to live together under a complicated set of rules. And me. I was Xavier Rockwell, the guy who once got mad about an HOA fine and inadvertently exposed a major embezzlement scheme. I was the guy who weaponized snow and started a chain reaction that sent someone to prison. I was the guy who stood up to a bully, or the guy who overreacted to a minor inconvenience, depending on who you asked. I was all of those things and none of them. I was just a person living in a cabin in Breckenridge, doing my best to navigate the complexities of community life, trying to be better than my worst impulses, while acknowledging those impulses existed. The story of the HOA and the snow was my story, but it was also Patricia's story and Linda's story, and the story of an entire community learning how to govern itself better. It was bigger than any one person's intentions or actions. As summer arrived and I sat on my deck watching the mountains turn green, I felt at peace with all of it. The anger had faded. The guilt had softened into acceptance. The satisfaction of justice had matured into something more nuanced and real. I had been part of something that mattered, even if my role was more complicated than heroic. I had stood up when it counted, even if my initial motivations were petty. I had helped expose real wrongdoing, even if the consequences were painful for everyone involved. And in the end, that had to be enough. Perfect heroes only existed in simplified stories. Real people were messy and contradictory, capable of both petness and principle. I was real, and so was everyone else in this story. The mountains stood eternal around my home, indifferent to human drama. Snow would fall again next winter. The HOA would continue to manage the community. Life would go on in all its complicated, imperfect glory. And I would be here in my cabin with my properly maintained roof, a man who once got angry about a fine and changed everything. Not because I was special, but because I was stubborn enough to push back, and lucky enough that my push back revealed something that genuinely needed to be addressed. That was the truth of it, complex and unsatisfying and absolutely real. And as I sat there in the fading summer light, I was finally okay with that truth and my place in it.